be called the best at anything is special. But after over 50 years of hard rock and heavy metal, to be called the best is amazing. And yet, in this year, we're going to see a couple of albums come out that in their category may be the absolute number one, the very best that's ever happened. Who are these artists? Who are these albums? Find out next. Welcome, metal enthusiast, to another episode of The Metal Dude Abides. As I mentioned in our little opener, we have a very special episode today because we're going to talk about two of the greatest albums of all time. The first is probably an obvious one. The year is 1978, and the greatest debut album in the history of hard rock and heavy metal is going to take place this year. The other is maybe the greatest double live album of all time. It takes place this very year. When you start talking about 50 years of metal, when you're talking literally thousands of albums, every band has a debut. This is, to say something is the best, you know it's special. So let's get right to it, and let's start off with Best Newcomer of the Year right off the bat. Let's get to it. Best Newcomer of the Year, we're just going to talk about one today. Van Halen. To be around in the late 70s when Van Halen hit the scene was something special. We're talking the original lineup. David Lee Roth, Eddie Van Halen, Alex Van Halen, Michael Anthony. A lot of people have not really given Van Halen a chance because their run ends pretty quickly. This is a pretty short-lived phenomenon because, egos and everything. The band breaks up. That's for another story. Van Hagar comes onto the scene and has a much longer shelf life, if you will, than the original Van Halen. But make no mistake, if you weren't around when this was going on, Van Halen was a phenomenon. When you put this album, when you put that needle to the vinyl, you were about to hear something unbelievable. Van Halen wasn't just a great album. They were a shock to the culture. And they have to be hard rock and heavy metal newcomer of the year. Now, the Grammys that year went with A Taste of Honey. You remember A Taste of Honey? You don't? Probably not. They were a little bit of a one-hit wonder. Their one hit was called Boogie Oogie Oogie. That's right, Boogie Oogie Oogie. Unfortunately, we're still in the midst of the disco era. And as much as I like disco, this isn't even a really good disco song. The Grammys are off in the weeds here. Van Halen doesn't even get a nomination. Taste of Honey wins it. Now, an interesting nominee I just happened to notice in here is the Cars, who, at the very least, the Grammys could have picked the Cars. Rick Ocasek and the crew came out with one of the best debut albums in the history of rock and roll. But let's be honest, even the Cars, as great as they were, could not compete with the mighty Van Halen. So not only does Van Halen win Best Hard Rock and Heavy Metal Debut, they're also going to win Newcomer of the Year across the board. Sorry, Taste of Honey. We'll all remember Boogie Oogie Oogie for another 5 minutes of fame. But Van Halen stands forever. Now, speaking of Van Halen, they're probably going to be in this next category because we're going to talk Best Musical Performance of the Year. 1978 Best Musical Performance of the Year. This is a stacked lineup, folks. The nominees are AC/DC, Kicked in the Teeth. This, surprisingly to me, is a fairly deep cut from AC/DC. I'm not sure why this wasn't a huge hit. I'm not sure why it's not commonly found on the top few songs of AC/DC's illustrious history. But if you want to hear an infectious Angus Young riff, and we all know Angus Young is the king of infectious heavy metal riffs, look no further than this bad boy right here. Angus kills it. Kind of starts off with kind of a bluesy, Bon Scott's telling you all about the sorrows of his life. But when Angus kicks in with that riff, that song kicks into overdrive. One of my favorite AC/DC songs of all time. Go out and listen to it. It'll probably be yours as well. Our first nominee, AC/DC, Kicked in the Teeth. Our second nominee, Judas Priest with Exciter, off their Stained Class album. Listen, this is considered by many to be the first speed metal song in history, and it's a fast one. The dual guitars of Glenn Tipton and KK Downing have never sounded better. They are really finding what they are as Judas Priest, and they come out with a scorcher. It's the album opener, and you know how I love a good, fast, aggressive album opener. This is a good one. Our second nominee, Exciter by Judas Priest. Our third nominee is Rainbow with Gates of Babylon. You know how I love it when a song tells a story and where the instruments are not just being played for tempo or whatnot, but they tell the story as well. Rainbow is the masters of this, and they have been on a Hall of Fame run through the 70s. We talked about this in Stargazer, where Ritchie Blackmore and the boys paint this kind of deserty Egyptian scene. Well, here, Gates of Babylon, they paint an eerie, evil scene. The intro in this song, the use of the keyboards and the use of the guitar in particular, are very creepy, very impressive, and they set the tone for the whole song, which ends with the great crescendo. The devil is me, and I'm holding the key to the gates of sweet hell, Babylon. This is an epic song that tells a very haunting story, and it's our third nominee, Rainbow, Gates of Babylon. Our fourth nominee, Ted Nugent, with the live version of Stormtroopin'. Let me be your guide for a second. Ted Nugent is easily in the top 5 guitarists of the 70s. He is a monster guitar player. Some of the greatest solos you're ever going to hear. Riffy, speedy, he's got it all. This, in the entire Ted Nugent catalog, this to me is his greatest riff. A lot of people off the studio album say Stranglehold is his biggest moment. Not going to argue that. This is live. It's raw. It is energetic. It's aggressive. This solo right here is my number one guitar solo in the entirety of the Ted Nugent collection. Again, if you have never listened to Double Live Gonzo, Stormtroopin' is not one of his bigger hits. Go out and listen to this unbelievable guitar solo. Goose pimples right up and down my arms right now. Our fourth nominee, Ted Nugent, Stormtroopin' live. And surprise, surprise, our fifth nominee, Van Halen, with the song, or in this case, solo, Eruption, followed by the song, You Really Got Me. Because you got to put them together after all these years. Eddie Van Halen is about to change music. One of the common mistakes people make about Eddie Van Halen is they say, listen, Eddie Van Halen sounds just like insert great guitars from the 80s. But that's grammatically incorrect. What you should be saying is that insert greatest, heavy metal guitarist of the 80s sounds just like Eddie Van Halen, because that is more technically correct, because everybody copied Eddie Van Halen. He was the original. He's the first one who got up on the frets and started doing the tapping and all the different things that he was doing. Nobody had ever seen that before. No one had ever heard that before. There was a lot of more classically trained guitarists. I love Richie Blackmore, but he was one of them who was just like, really couldn't say anything good about Eddie Van Halen, because they were so jealous, because they knew their stay at the top was over. Eddie Van Halen blew them all right off the stage. There was a lot of bands that toured with Van Halen or brought Van Halen as their opening act, and they were horrified. They were like, we gotta get Van Halen out. We can't go touring with these guys. They're blowing us off the stage. This was, like I say, you put that needle down on that vinyl, 1978, and you heard this, you were blown away. One more thing about this. We can talk about this when we get to the album. But the other thing about this album that I really appreciate, I don't do a lot of this because, it's difficult to really, it's a very difficult thing to do. But there was a lot of, when you listen to 70s albums, you can kind of tell they had a kind of a sound, a production, if you will. And you go, that's a really good album, but boy, it's got that kind of 70s feel to it. The producer of this album should be sung to the praises, because not only was Eddie Van Halen doing some things, the production of this is fantastic. It really brings that band out. We're going to talk a little bit about this with other bands. We talked about with Kiss a couple of episodes ago, where their studio albums just seemed flat, and then they were brought to life through their live album. This is like a live album in the studio. It has such energy. It has such, it just explodes. It's so dynamic sounding. Really ahead of its time. Really influential. Because, like I said, for the next 20 years, every guitarist is going to sound just like Eddie Van Halen. So, our fifth nominee, Van Halen, Eruption, You Really Got Me. And the winner is Eruption, You Really Got Me. There are two guitarists, Jimi Hendrix and Eddie Van Halen, that changed music. There's a lot of great players. There's a lot of fast players. There's a lot of people who make great riffs. There's a lot of people who do dynamic solos. But only two changed the course of music forever. Hendrix, Van Halen, that's it. Short list. Now, Ted Nugent made it closer than it should have been, because he just comes out with that amazing guitar solo. Nugent wasn't ready to give up his crown as the best guitarist, but you have to pick Van Halen here, because while Ted Nugent's a fantastic player, this changed music forever. And you don't see those very often. You don't see the greatest of all time come around ever very often. So hats off to Van Halen. Again, I'm sure we'll be talking about it a little bit more in this episode as we talk about just what a phenom this was. But our winner again, Eddie Van Halen, You Really Got Me. Now, the Grammys that year went with Chuck Mangione. Now, Chuck Mangione is this fella that, I don't know my horn instruments that well, but I think it's the trumpet. He played the horn. I'm sure, there's a lot of, trumpet players running around going, yeah, Chuck Mangione, best ever. Okay. Prejudice alert. Let's say Chuck Mangione, best trumpet player ever. Eddie Van Halen, best guitarist ever. In my opinion, all day, every day, guitars are greater than trumpets. Just, what are you going to do? So not only does Edward Van Halen and the boys win Musical Performance of the Year for hard rock and metal, but they're going to win it across the board. Sorry, Chuck Mangione. You just ran up against too much. You cannot top. What Eddie Van Halen does here is so earth-shattering. Again, we talk about this every episode. How in the world? The Grammys are supposed to be the people who know the most about music. They're handing out awards for excellence in music. And they missed Van Halen completely. I don't think Van Halen ever did win anything during the David Lee Roth era. Just, it just makes you wonder why people even tuned in. Like, Chuck Mangione? Really? I think it was also funny that they did one of the nominees was kind of a remake of the Pink Panther theme, Henry Mancini. It wasn't the original Pink Panther, because I saw in the nominees like Pink Panther. As a child, I was a cartoon fanatic. Pink Panther was around before '78. He just kind of redid it, and that got a nominee. Okay, we're going to redo the Pink Panther theme, but we're not going to recognize Edward Van Halen? Come on, Grammys. How bad are you at your jobs? Anyway, enough of that. Let's go to Best Vocal Performance of 1978. Our first nominee, Wheel in the Sky by Journey. This is a little bit of Journey's right on that border of hard rock and maybe mainstream rock, but I think especially early in Journey's career, they were pretty heavy. They were pretty, cutting edge. And I got to put Steve Perry in here. I think Steve Perry may be one of the greatest vocalists in the history of rock and roll. Just the range and the power in his voice. And I think it might be right here my favorite Steve Perry track, Wheel in the Sky. Just kills it on this song. This was really when I first started noticing Journey, right here. They were a huge act in the late 70s, and a lot of it was because of this man's beautiful voice. Our first nominee, Journey, Wheel in the Sky. Our second nominee is someone we've had on this channel quite a bit, the metal god Rob Halford and Judas Priest with Beyond the Realms of Death. I am a sucker for a good heavy metal ballad, and you can't get much better than this one. Beyond the Realms of Death ends up being a very infamous song, as we'll see, about a decade later. Judas Priest finds themselves in court over this song for a myriad of reasons we don't need to get into, but this song is what you want in a heavy metal ballad. Sung to perfection by Rob Halford. The emotion that's conveyed in this song is just beautiful, and it's intense, and it is dark. But I love this song. I love Rob Halford singing on it. It is our second nominee, Beyond the Realms of Death, Judas Priest. Another familiar face in this category, Queen, with Don't Stop Me Now. Freddie Mercury is considered by many to be the greatest vocalist in the history of rock and roll. And yet he comes into these categories year after year with just a stacked field. He is a dynamic singer. This is one of those fun songs from Queen. It is our third nominee, Don't Stop Me Now by Queen. Our fourth nominee, Rainbow with Rainbow Eyes. Now this is a big moment, folks. If you've been watching the channel throughout this, we've had one person who's brought home the gold 3 years in a row. And that was in the vocalist category in the late 60s, early 70s. Robert Plant owned this category. He won 3 awards in a row. Dio has won the last 2. He is the defending champion. He's going for 3 in a row. And he's going to throw us a little bit of a curveball because here he's going to do a ballad. Something you don't see Dio do very often, but he does it beautifully. It is our 4th nominee, Rainbow Eyes by Rainbow. Our 5th and final nominee, Thin Lizzy with Still in Love with You live. We were talking a little bit about the greatest double live albums in the history of heavy metal. But in 1978, there was some tremendous live music coming on. In fact, I would say right here, 78, 79, you're going to hear some amazing live albums. Blue Oyster Cult has a great one, Some Enchanted Evening. The Scorpions have the Tokyo tapes. Mahogany Rush, for you guitar aficionados, has the, well, there's not the most original name. They just have an album called Live. But Thin Lizzy has this one, Live and Dangerous. I have kind of a weird history with Thin Lizzy. I come into Thin Lizzy a little bit later on when John Sykes has already joined the band. So I come in right at the end with Thunder and Lightning. And Thin Lizzy's really much heavier than what you're going to see in the 70s Thin Lizzy. So I had this impression of what Thin Lizzy was. When I went back into the catalog into the 70s, I was like, I don't know, this is a little softer, a little more melodic than I was hoping for. And I kind of started thinking, well, maybe I don't like Thin Lizzy. This double live album will make you rethink that. I think Thin Lizzy suffers a little bit like what Kiss was going through in their early years, where Thin Lizzy is a great band, but their studio albums don't quite capture it. This live album captures what Thin Lizzy should have sounded like in their studio albums. It brings some life into their music that at times it doesn't convey. So if you're on the fence with Thin Lizzy, go check out this album, Live and Dangerous. And in particular, this song, Still in Love with You, where the live version, much better than the studio version. Honestly, though, I almost thought about just putting Thin Lizzy, nominating them, and just put the entire album out there. Because there are so many, to me, the best moments of Phil Lynott. I love his voice. Even if I'm not really into a Thin Lizzy song, I will listen to it because of Phil Lynnott's voice. That's how much I love it. And he is great throughout this entire album. He is a tour de force. Thin Lizzy, Still in Love with You, the live version. And the winner is Robert Plant's record is safe. Dio has been beaten. The winner, Judas Priest, Beyond the Realms of Death. This was a close one. And ironically enough, Dio probably isn't even in the top 3 this year. It's amazing. It was really a toss-up, I'll be honest. I was so close to being the big upset Steve Perry because I think his vocals on that particular song are so amazing. But Halford just kills it on this song. I think one of the tropes that I might be a little guilty of, and you see it with both Rainbow Eyes and Beyond the Realms of Death, is I really like that intense heavy metal ballad. You pull that off, you're going to be tough to beat. Halford is an expert at that intensity and that range in this song. Oh my goodness. That crescendo, when at the point of death in this song, just unbelievable. Halford is going to be a force in this category. Dio's a force in this category. They're going to go head to head a lot, but this year you got to give it to Halford, our big winner. We also have a secondary award to give for Best Female Performance. And I could just name this the Ann Wilson Award because, again, it's Heart with Straight On. Anytime Ann Wilson does anything, it seems, she's a shoo-in to win female vocalist. And I don't know how to say it. She is the epitome of great female hard rock, heavy metal voice. Because again, her voice is beautiful, but also so unbelievably powerful. Straight On's another great hit and a great vocal performance by Ann Wilson, and is our winner for Best Female Performance of the Year. Now, that year, the male vocal performance, the Grammys picked Barry Manilow, who apparently was at the Copacabana. Back to the disco that everyone listened to at the Copa. Barry Manilow fell in love. Listen, you might as well find out this sooner or later. I am a little bit of a mark for disco. I like disco. I even kind of like Barry Manilow. But that's not Vocalist of the Year material, people. It's a catchy little tune. Everybody's been to the Copa. It's, I think there's a murder and the showgirls and all the things. Great little story being told, but come on. You can't compare Barry Manilow with Rob Halford. I don't know what the Grammys, I don't know what they're doing. And Anne Murray wins for Best Female Vocalist. Anne Murray was a big, okay, this is the late 70s. I'm still a youngster. I'm living in the house. Anne Murray's like a country western pop star at this point in time. So I listened to a lot of Anne Murray. And again, she had a couple nice, kind of country pop tunes. But I never thought her voice, even in country western, was all that special. She's no Ann Wilson. So again, Barry Manilow and Anne Murray are no competition for Rob Halford and Ann Wilson. Barry Manilow is no competition for any of the 5 nominees we had. He just doesn't have that kind of a voice. He's got a nice little singing voice, but the range of Freddie Mercury, the range of Ronnie James Dio, the Steve Perry, these guys are like angels singing compared to Barry Manilow. No way. Now, back to my disco heart thumping a little bit. The Bee Gees are in here as the best group. Sure, why not? They are a phenomenal singing group. So I'm not going to completely bash everything that the Grammys have, but best male vocalist across the board, Halford. Best female vocalist across the board is Ann Wilson. And it's not even a comparison to what the Grammys picked that year. Speaking of what the Grammys picked that year, let's go to the best hard rock song. All right, best hard rock song of 1978. We talked about this a little bit. The live albums that are out this year. And this is one of those times. I Want You to Want Me. Live version, live at Budokan, Cheap Trick. This is a very interesting story. Very similar to what we were talking about with Kiss, but a little bit different. Cheap Trick, as far as I can tell, really doesn't have much of a following in the States, but they're beloved in Japan. Kind of like Spinal Tap if you watch the movie. So they go over to Japan and they do a live album that was meant to be released only in Japan because that's where their fan base was. That it was such a great live album. It exploded worldwide, and Cheap Trick became one of the biggest acts in the world, including here in the States. That's how good this album is. And if you had to pick one moment on this live album, it's this bad boy right here. Our first nominee. I Want You to Want Me. Cheap Trick live at Budokan. We talked about this in the vocal category. But Journey's about to become one of the biggest bands in the history of rock and roll, and it starts right here, Wheel in the Sky. This is a little bit of a heavier Journey, and it is my man crush on Steve Perry's voice right here. He's never going to sound better than right here, folks. He belts it on this one. Almost beat Rob Halford for Vocalist of the Year. It was razor thin. That's how good this song is. So it has to be nominated for Best Hard Rock Song. Wheel in the Sky by Journey. Okay, this is going to be an interesting one. The third nominee is Styx with the song Renegade. Okay, I got to let this out. I can't stand Styx. I have never understood why they were a big band or why people like them. But I love this song. Ooh, this is a good song. If Styx did more things like this, I would have been a huge fan. But overall, I don't really care for the band. This is now, I'm always griping about the Grammys being a one-hit wonder, but this is a one-hit wonder for me. Styx has one, and here it is. But it is a good one. So, what the heck? Third nominee, Styx, with the song Renegade. Our fourth nominee, and one that's on here a lot, UFO, with Only You Can Rock Me. This would be the swan song for the Michael Schenker era of UFO, and what a run. Go back through, people, and the last 5 or 6 years, almost every year UFO shows up in this category, because at every album they have some of the most commercially viable, great hard rock songs you're ever going to find. They won the category last year with Lights Out. They're back. UFO, what a hit machine. Love the stuff. Fourth nominee, Only You Can Rock Me. Our fifth nominee, Van Halen, with Ain't Talking About Love. We'll talk about this a little bit when we get to the album category. There's no spoiler alert here. I just said it was the greatest debut album of all time. You know it's going to be up for Album of the Year. But this is one of those albums that we refer to all the time as a perfect album. And really, when you start talking about a perfect album, the problem you run into is which song do you pull out as the best what's the best song on this album? Ooh. They've got two big hits, Running with the Devil, Janie's Crying. Both of those are great. You have the iconic Ice Cream Man. The list goes on and on. Like I said, we can talk about every song on this album being an absolute killer. But I think this one is that blend of heaviness, catchiness, great riffs, great melodies. It all comes together. Take your pick. This album is great from start to finish. Tough one, but I'm going to say the highlight is our fifth nominee, Ain't Talking About Love by Van Halen. And the winner is Ain't Talking About Love. My love is rotten to the core. Van Halen is going to take Best Hard Rock Song of 1978. And as much as we're sitting here gushing over this Van Halen album, this competition was tight. We're talking maybe the definitive song of Cheap Trick. In my opinion, we're definitely talking the definitive song of Styx. And we're talking about maybe the song that broke Journey big. We're talking three of the biggest hard rock bands of all time. Big songs from theirs. And on Van Halen, this is just one of, 9 or 10 fantastic songs. But that's how good that Van Halen album is. Ain't Talking About Love squeaks past some of the best hard rock songs of all time. Let's go to Heavy Metal Song of the Year. Two-faced woman with your two-faced lies. Don't worry, I'm not going to sing anymore. Our first nominee, AC/DC, Kicked in the Teeth. We talked about this in the Best Musical category. I don't understand why this wasn't one of the biggest hits in the AC/DC catalog. It is fantastic. Go out and do yourself a favor. Final track on the album. It is one of those that you will be snapping your fingers to. Very underrated track. Our first nominee, Kicked in the Teeth by AC/DC. Now, interestingly enough, our second nominee is one we haven't seen for a while. but they are one of the big bands of all time. Black Sabbath with Never Say Die. An ironic title because they're about to call it quits and kick out their lead singer Ozzy Osbourne. Now, the reason we haven't seen Sabbath in a while is, quite frankly, we've hit a really rough stretch, a rocky stretch for the boys in Sabbath. Things are not going well. Ozzy tried to quit the band once. Now he's been fired. Drugs have overrun them. And the last few albums have been, well, mediocre at best. But luckily for us, Black Sabbath has one last great song to give us before they part ways. And it's right here. Our second nominee, Never Say Die by Black Sabbath. Our third nominee, the great power ballad that we discussed earlier, Beyond the Realms of Death by Judas Priest off their Stained Class album. This is the epitome of a great power ballad, and it had to be on the list this year. Now, our fourth nominee is a little bit controversial, but it's only controversial because of a technicality. Our fourth nominee, Judas Priest, once again, with their song, Hell Bent for Leather, off the Killing Machine album. Now, why is this controversial? Let's just get to it and move on. Killing Machine was released in 1978. Everywhere but the United States, who had a problem with the title Killing Machine, which delayed its release till the very early parts of 1979 as it was repackaged as we knew it as Hell Bent for Leather. Now, as you know, this is the Grammy Awards, so I try to replicate as closely as I can the atmosphere that was going on. So if you were with us a couple of episodes ago, I did not include the Australian-only releases of AC/DC, only when they became that worldwide phenomenon did I start counting those albums. So why am I counting an album that didn't come out in the United States till 1979? Because nowadays most lists include them in the 1978 category. And it's not like it was a small release. It was a huge release over in England. So why split hairs? It's a great album. It came out late 78, early 79, depending on your viewpoint. I'm sticking it here in 1978, breaking my own rules because I can. Hell Bent for Leather, Judas Priest, our fourth nominee. And finally, Kill the King by Rainbow. Much like Never Say Die, this is going to be the swan song for Rainbow and their lead singer, Ryan James Dio, who ironically is going to go into Black Sabbath and replace Ozzy Osbourne. What a soap opera. Rainbow puts out 3 albums, and in my humble opinion, is on like a Hall of Fame run. It's too bad that Blackmore and Dio could not keep this going, because I love this stuff to death. Kill the King is right up there among the very best of the Rainbow songs. It is our 5th nominee. Kill the King by Rainbow. And the winner is... if you're going to go out with a bang. Rainbow, Kill the King. Again, it is unfortunate that Rainbow could not figure it out and stay together, because they were special. And this song is an epitome of why they're special. Dio's voice is beautiful in this song. Cozy Powell's drumming on this song, legendary. And of course, you had Richie Blackmore killing it on guitar. I love this song, and it is our heavy metal, 1978 heavy metal song of the year. Now, the song that year that the Grammys chose was Billy Joel with Just the Way You Are. Billy Joel, truth be told, probably have this album in my collection. I liked Billy Joel, pretty good. But he's not in this range. He's not in this ballpark, in my opinion. Billy Joel would go on to be very controversial, as he would try to follow up with the heavy metal community. The heavy metal community, when the wall comes down in the late 80s, they go over and play these concerts over in Russia. You've seen the crowds that came out for people like Metallica and Ozzy and whatnot. Billy Joel thought, well, I'll go over there and do my thing. And people were like, you're all right. And he kind of had a temper tantrum and walked off stage. Well, you can have all your temper tantrums, Billy Joel, because you're losing to heavy metal again. You're not in the ballpark of these great heavy metal bands. So not only am I saying best hard rock and heavy metal song is Kill the King, it's the song of the year across the board. Lump it, Billy Joel. All right, let's go to the biggie. Album of the year. Wow, these 5 albums are so good. Our first nominee, Power Age by AC/DC. They're the defending champions in this category, and they are on a run of a lifetime. Just finished with Let There Be Rock, our 1977 heavy metal album of the year. Highway to Hell is right around the corner. So sometimes people can sleep on Power Age because it's kind of like that second movie in a trilogy, right? But it is so good. A little bit different, maybe a little bluesier. They kind of dial it back a little bit from Let There Be Rock, but it is a wonderful album. Our first nominee, AC/DC, Power Age. Now, Judas Priest has 2 albums this year. One of those I love to death, and one of them is kind of a meh album for me. But the one that I love is Stay in Class. Many people view this as the absolute best of the 70s Judas Priest. It is definitely their heaviest. We talked about Beyond the Realm of Death, one of the great power ballads of all time. We talked about Exciter being one of the speed metal albums. And I always love to talk about their phenomenal covers. This year, it's Better By You, Better Than Me, a Spooky Tooth cover with one of my all-time favorite riffs. And that's just skipping around on the highlights. This is a fantastic Judas Priest album. Our second nominee, Stay in Class. Our third nominee, we talked about this, the swan song of the Dio Rainbow years, Long Live Rock and Roll. Now, these guys are kind of defending champs too, because their last studio album won Album of the Year with Rainbow Rising. And I gotta be honest with you, while many people look at Rainbow Rising as this phenomenally great superstar album, many people might not think Long Live Rock and Roll's in that class. I, however, am not one of them. I think Long Live Rock and Roll is, again, one of those perfect albums that is sometimes unfairly not put in the same category as Rainbow Rising. And I think they're right across the board from each other. Rainbow Rising does have my 2 favorite Rainbow songs of all time, Stargazer and Light in the Black. But if you probably take the next 6 or 7 best Rainbow songs, they're all on this album. Top to bottom. Great, 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 great. Love this album. Doesn't get enough credit. What a Hall of Fame level. And again, a great swan song for Rainbow. Our third nominee, Long Live Rock and Roll by Rainbow. Now, if you haven't figured it out by now, now's the time to reveal our fourth nominee, Ted Nugent, Double Live Gonzo, is, in my humble opinion, the greatest double live album in the history of hard rock and heavy metal. A couple of years ago, Kiss wins the award, and I said then, what a great double live album, and maybe the most important double live album of all time, because Kiss was, at that point, kind of a no-name band that was really struggling. Their record label was struggling, and then they became the biggest commercial success of the entire decade. This isn't like that. Ted Nugent is already a huge star. He just comes off one of his most commercially viable albums in Cat Scratch Fever. But here, he takes the essence of Ted Nugent and just brings it to life in a very special way. Double Live Gonzo, the reason I think this is the best double live album of all time is it is bombastic, It is loud. It has all the energy. It has all the aggression. It brings out Ted Nugent's personality. His banter with the crowd is top notch. He has some of the most phenomenal guitar work. The tone of and this is all live. This isn't anything being dubbed in the studios. One of the things you'll hear a lot about these live albums with these great singers is they're touching it up in the studio. This is raw, and Nugent, this is how he plays guitar live. It really brings a special life to it. And one more note. If you want to win a bar bet from someone, this album has the greatest scream in the history of heavy metal. And people say, I'll pick this band, I'll pick that one. Pick Motor City Madhouse and listen for the scream. One of the most primal screams you're ever going to hear in the history of recorded music. I can gush and gush about this album. It is what you want out of a live album. It's like you were there. It's got all the energy you want. Greatest double live album of all time, right here. Ted Nugent, Double Live Gonzo, our fourth nominee. But it's going against the greatest debut album of all time. You knew it was coming. Van Halen. Van Halen 1, the great one. Changed music. We talked about it. Eddie Van Halen's guitars were amazing. But don't sleep on Alex Van Halen on the drums. And don't sleep on David Lee Roth. I love Sammy Hagar. He's going to be on this program a lot going forward. But Van Hagar could never, ever match Van Halen. This wasn't just about the dynamic music. This was a cultural revolution. David Lee Roth was the front man. You hear a lot about frontmen. David Lee Roth was a front man. Let me tell you, we don't talk enough about David Lee Roth because he's not got the greatest vocals in the world. And obviously, the first thing that's going to stick out to you with Van Halen is that guitar playing. But David Lee Roth, man, he had charisma just dripping. This was like, if you knew how much time I spent drawing the Van Halen logo on every notebook, every desktop in the history of my school, this was a cultural phenomenon. This is the greatest debut album of all time. What a year. Who's going to win this thing? I got to pick one, don't I? Uh-oh. And the winner is Van Halen 1. You just can't change music the way they did and not get credit for it. This is top notch. Let me just say this. We're in the late 70s. Van Halen is going to go on about a 6-album run that's going to be huge. They win the award here, but look out, they're going to be a force for the next few years. Love the original Van Halen. Love the David Lee Roth version. Ted Nugent made it tough. Rainbow made it tough. But they just, at the end of the day, they could not compete with this tremendous album. Now, we talked about all these tremendous albums. What did the Grammys do that year, you ask? Well, remember, we're in the midst of the disco revolution. And who's leading that disco revolution? None other than one Vinnie Barbarino. You know him as John Travolta. The Grammys that year nominated not one, but 2 terrible John Travolta movie soundtracks, ultimately given the award to Saturday Night Fever and given a nomination to Grease, which is not just a bad John Travolta movie, it's a bad John Travolta movie with Olivia Newton-John in it. Ugh. That's what the Grammys went with. They were all disco all the time. We talked about Boogie Oogie Oogie. Well, here's Saturday Night Fever. Now, I did like disco, and the soundtrack is dominated by the Bee Gees, who are a great band, and disco was definitely a phenomenon that was about to die in about 6 months. So you know what? I'm going to give Album of the Year as well to Van Halen. Because as disco was about to collapse, Van Halen was just getting started. All right, that's our episode. This is a great time if you love the content and if you agree with me that Van Halen was the greatest debut album of all time. Give it a thumbs up. Give me a like. Subscribe to the channel. We're going to be wrapping up our decade of the 70s next week when we start talking about 1979. We're also coming up on our 1-year anniversary. So I've got a couple of special things planned in the next few weeks. So you don't want to miss those. So go ahead and subscribe so you don't miss a single episode. In the meantime, this is the Metal Dude signing off. As always, take care.